Speed Alley 102.3 ESPN and MMA Meltdown. Pleased to be joined by Jon Anik, who you'll hear on UFC Fight Nights on FX and Fuel with Florian. He does the play-by-play, and I got to say, Jon, thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us. And the last UFCs that I've watched on FX, Fox, a real fine job.
I appreciate it very much, man. You know, it's been an interesting transition from me having worked as a journalist my whole life and now working for the promotion. I still consider myself a broadcast journalist, but it's a different animal when you're working for the promotion as opposed to a network. But it's been great. You know, it was 6 wonderful years at ESPN, but I just wasn't getting enough MMA and enough UFC, and this really was a dream job for me. I know it sounds trite, but it really was, and it's been a great opportunity, and I've learned a lot on the job. I learn every show. And just hopefully with the repetitions, we're getting better every time out. But there really has been no greater thrill for me in broadcasting than to sit, you know, cage side and call these UFC fights.
Is it okay to ask the next question? Will you be the constant play-by-play man? I noticed that you filled in for Mike Goldberg a couple of times. Is that just a temporary thing, and you'll continue your duties on FX with Florian, or will that lead into a full-time thing there?
You know, as far as I know, I'll remain the number 2 guy. Mike Goldberg is back to do the fights on Fox in Chicago this weekend. I'm here to fill in for Jay Glazer on the Postfight Show and the Weigh-in Show here later today. But, yeah, you know, when the opportunity comes, I'll certainly be ready. You know, it was an absolute thrill to call UFC 155 on pay-per-view with Joe Rogan at the end of the year, and thankfully, Goldie is back and healthy and ready to go. He's been really supportive and respectful of me and is a really classy guy, and I'm glad he's healthy and ready to get back. But it was certainly an honor for me to get that call, and I felt like Joe Rogan and I established some pretty good chemistry. I'd love to get the chance to work with him again, but, you know, Goldie's here to stay, and he certainly has established a lot of goodwill with the fight fans, and I'm sure they'll be happy to hear him back on the call here tomorrow night.
Well, Jon, I watched, as I said, the last couple on TV, and I thought that you did a wonderful job, and I couldn't actually call you a fill-in. After all, 6 years with ESPN, you did the first season with Bellator, you continue to do stuff on Fuel and FX, and you work with Florian, and I think the two of you combined are a great 1-2 punch, no pun intended, and the work that you do. So for those that don't know you, could you tell everybody, give them a little bit of a background on Jon Anik and where you came from to be where you are right now in mixed martial arts?
Absolutely. You know, it's been a long run. You know, I remember my first days out of college, I was teaching autistic kids during the day, and then at night I was working as a sports writer for the Metro West Daily News. Then I eventually transitioned to Boston Sports Radio. I was making about $14,000 a year, I think, and just making ends meet on the side with various jobs. And, you know, I just felt like I just had to keep going. And you know, I have an identical twin brother who was in the acting world, and after about 6 years in L.A., he just said, that's enough for me, and he ended up going off and starting a business, has been very successful in that walk of life. But I really feel like when it comes to the entertainment industry and when it comes to the performing arts, you just have to stay with it as long as humanly possible. And thankfully, I got a few breaks along the way. You know, I got hired by ESPN Radio and was able to sort of transition from ESPN Radio to ESPN Television. And then I got an audition to host MMA Live, which eventually made its way to ESPN2. And that's how I surfaced on the UFC's radar. But, you know, it's been a long time coming since I got out of college, since 2001. And, you know, there were a lot of down times, a lot of overnight shifts. You know, for 2 years I commuted from Boston to Bristol, Connecticut, driving 3.5 hours combined every day. And, you know, I feel like I put in the time, and you just have to be ready when opportunities present themselves because you never know when an opportunity is going to come around again. I remember my audition for ESPN Radio, and the way they do their audition process, you go through a screening, but then your actual audition is live on the ESPN Radio network. So here I am auditioning, doing a sports update, you know, in front of millions of listeners, and you really only get one crack at it. And if you spit the bit or you're not ready for prime time, maybe that opportunity never comes around again. So thankfully, when I have gotten a break or I've gotten an opportunity, I feel like I've been ready for it. And here we are with the UFC. You know, I'm in year 2 of a 3-year contract, and it's a job I took hoping that I would do it for 20 years. And so far so good, man. I'm just trying to get better with every show, and I feel like every time I sit down in that seat cage side, I have to earn that spot. Nothing's guaranteed. They could fire me after any show, and I feel like I need to earn that chair, and that's really what I focus on. I don't look ahead. I focus on every show, and better to be lucky than good sometimes, I guess.
And a wonderful job at that. And just from what you're saying right here, and I'm glad you brought up how you started out with the low pay. I think people get the idea that broadcasters and people such as yourself just walk into a place and the money's there and the contract is there. And I've said for years and years, you have to crawl before you can walk in this business. And you've done exactly that. But your work that I have heard anyway, and I follow broadcasters and I follow MMA and other things, has been exemplary, and it's a real pleasure for me to be able to talk to someone such as yourself that have paid the dues, and now you are where you are, and I think it's a testament to exactly what your attitude is in the business. And I noticed that you worked as an intern for the George Michael Sports Machine. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that was interesting. I went to Gettysburg College in Pennsylvania. I did one, they call it the Washington Journalism semester. So I was at American University in D.C. in 1999, and 4 or 5 nights a week I spent working at the George Michael Sports Machine. And it was just interesting to see the dynamic of a TV show like that. It was the longest-running syndicated sports show in the nation, and it was cool to see George and the late George Michael, may he rest in peace, and his wife was the head writer on the show, and a big part of my job there was charting games. And I'll never forget, these college football Saturdays, I would chart every play of 3 straight college football games. And when you talk about paying your dues, I mean, it was a great thrill to be a part of that TV show, and you would circle a play on your chart of a game, and it would end up leading the show, and that was sort of a thrill and everything that went along with that. But dude, I mean, I literally didn't put a pen down for 9 hours. I mean, I would do a 12 o'clock game, a 3:30 game, and then a 7 o'clock game, and those days beat me up pretty good. But, it's really an industry not unlike any other where you got to pay your dues. I remember for 3 years I taught the sports classes at the Connecticut School of Broadcasting there in Massachusetts, and so many guys, and an increasing number of women as well, but so many guys want to be sports broadcasters and want to do this for a living, and there's some great talents that never get those opportunities. And it's tough, because there are only so many jobs. I think the good news now is that the industry really is recession-proof and continues to explode. You're seeing all these networks, like the Pac-12 and the SEC develop their own networks, and that means more jobs for sports broadcasters. So, I feel like you and I both seem to have picked a good industry here, and oftentimes it's just about getting that one break and making the most of it,
Yes, and our special guest right here on 102.3 ESPN, Jon Anik. You heard him doing the play-by-play at UFC 155. You'll hear him on FX with Kenny Florian, and you'll hear him in MMA as a whole. And as I said, you do a fine job. Tell us what it's like to be in the position you're in. What do you do to prepare to do a broadcast during the week and in your regular and normal duties? Because, as I mentioned, I think people think you just walk right into that deal, but there's a lot of preparation that goes into what you do on a weekly, daily, monthly basis.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many hours it is. I always say there's never enough hours. If all of a sudden a fight card that I'm calling got postponed 24 hours as we were walking to the venue, I would be able to use those remaining hours to my advantage. There's so much content now on the internet. There's so much fight coverage that there really is never too much you can do. But the 2 core parts of my preparation, we get fighter bios from our UFC researcher. I take those bios and I handwrite them on fighter cards. It takes me about 6 or 8 hours. So that's how I commit some of the stuff to memory. So I take, the 24 fighter bios and literally write them verbatim on my fighter cards. And then what I go back and do is watch film. So I will watch the previous fight of all the guys on the card, just so their previous appearances are fresh in my head. And then there's a lot of script writing that goes into things as well. There's a lot of promos that we have to cut and read, and there's a lot of voiceover work that happens before we even hit the air. And, also just creating that opening stand-up is very key, what message we want to send right off the top of the show. And I remember, for my opening paragraph, when I did the UFC 155 pay-per-view with Joe Rogan, that opening paragraph took me an hour and a half to write. And it's just a few sentences, but you want it to be perfect because of the magnitude of that moment, and you really want to make sure that you're sending the right message. What is the sort of historical framework for this second fight between Cain Velasquez and Junior Dos Santos? So there's a lot that goes into it, and I think people don't realize, you got producers talking in your ear, counting you down all the time. There's a million things going on. Sometimes when I don't say anything, part of it's because I'm communicating with my talkback button with the producers, So there's so much that goes into live TV that I think a lot of the fans don't necessarily appreciate. It's pretty interesting, man. Sometimes it makes me miss radio, to be honest with you, because even though there are challenges and variables in radio, there's just so much that goes into a live, 3 to 5 hour television broadcast.
And John, I think that was probably one of the more impressive things that I noticed in your broadcast of the UFC at 155 was the intros. And I don't know if you're like me, but every show that I have an interest in, that's the part that I really like the most, the intro to the Ultimate Fighting Championship, the intro to an AFC title game or the Super Bowl or that type of thing. And actually, I came away from the shows that I've seen you do and say, boy, that was really a nice job. And the live as you exit out and you mention you're watching the UFC on FX or Fox, just a beautiful work. And I guess that's what sticks with me. So I, as a person, fan, broadcaster, really appreciate the work that you've done.
Well, I appreciate it, man, very much. That really means a lot. It's a lot of hard work, and I think like most things in life, repetitions are the key, and I think the more repetitions that you have, the more comfortable you will be. I tell people I was more nervous to call season 1 of Bellator, the first MMA fight I had ever called in 2009, than I was to call UFC 155, the heavyweight championship with Joe Rogan, because at that point in time, 4 years later, I had all these repetitions that I really felt ready for the moment, whereas when I sat down to do the first season of Bellator, I had done some boxing and some football for ESPN, but I had never called an MMA fight. So needless to say, I was a little bit more anxious. But, so much of life is about repetitions, and, I appreciate all the kind words, man. I really do. It means a lot, and oftentimes that's what keeps us going. So it's certainly an exciting time for the UFC, and it's fun for me to be a small part of the operation.
Last question for you. Are you a practitioner? Do you train anywhere in mixed martial arts as part of your broadcast duties to learn more about the sport or anything like that?
Well, I took boxing lessons for a couple of years, so I feel pretty adept when it comes to calling the boxing game and the kickboxing game. I did buy a gi recently. I haven't trained in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu just yet, but it certainly was one of my New Year's resolutions for 2013. And not that I need to, do it a ton, but I think even just to roll for 6 or 8 months would help me on the broadcast immeasurably. So it's certainly something on the short list and something I hope to do, when the schedule lightens up. As you know, most of our FX and Fuel TV shows are international, and with a young daughter at home and another one on the way, the time at home is precious when you're on the road about 120 nights a year. But I certainly want to hit the mat soon, and I just think even if you rolled, 10 or 15 times, I just think it would help you so much when it comes to calling that live action.
Right. Our special guest right here on 102.3 ESPN Radio and MMA Meltdown, you know him as Jon Anik, who does a fine job as play-by-play man on FX, and you'll hear him on many topics related to Ultimate Fighting Championship. We say this, John, a lot of times when people come on. We've said it to people that started out and then hit the UFC and others. And I'd say it to you, hey, when you hit the big time, don't forget us right here, but you've hit the big time. So I guess I'll ask, maybe down the road when things get even bigger and better for you, we can get you back on and talk about things relating to the UFC and other things you're doing in broadcasting. How's that sound?
It was an absolute pleasure, man. I'd be glad to come on with you anytime. You can find me on Twitter or look me up and just reach out, and I'd be happy to come back on with you here in Denver, man. I appreciate the time.
Thank you very much, and good luck this weekend.
Thank you so much, my man.
call has been recorded.